Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, a show that will help you transform your marketing from mere messaging to programs that break the rules and make a difference. Join the movement today and learn non-traditional techniques that give you an edge. Now, here's your Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
My guest today is Manny Rodriguez, Chief Marketing and Experience Officer at UCHealth, a remarkable network of 7 hospitals and 100 clinics anchored academically around the University of Colorado Hospital. Manny has had an amazingly diverse career. He started in pharma at places like Schering-Plough and Abbott Labs and Bristol-Myers Squibb. Then he jumped into the energy business at Reliant and Energy, and then, figure this, went on to financial services. And then really recently in 2015, he came back to healthcare when he joined UCHealth. Now, Manny told me that his hobby is driving his 7-year-old son around to 3 soccer teams in his quest to be the next Ronaldo. And then to baseball games, just in case the Ronaldo thing doesn't quite work out. So, well, if that doesn't set the tone for a kick-ass show, I don't know what will. Welcome to the show, Manny.
Thank you, Drew. I think what I just realized is I have a thing for, industries that, are very highly regulated. I need to get away from them somehow.
Yeah, I think there is some commonality there. You certainly are industries that are not necessarily famous for sort of what I would call renegade thinking. But anyway, I know that you are. I saw your panel at the CMO Club Summit. By the way, it was great seeing you there. And I was really impressed by your comments during the panel session. And for the listeners who've been following along at Renegade Thinkers Unite, this panel included Ara Yerganian, who was episode 5. He's the CMO at Sutter Health. And my friend Carol Cruz, who was the CMO of Cambia and then formerly of ESPN. And if you saw the 3 of them, you would not have really thought these are healthcare folks that are, selling beds in hospitals. It was an amazing and unexpected panel. But let's just talk about what it means in your mind to sort of be a renegade in the healthcare industry today.
Well, it's funny because, you use the term renegade, and I wouldn't consider myself a renegade. I just, quite frankly, don't want to be a healthcare marketer. And I say that with the notion of the bar in healthcare marketing is set really, really low. And I don't want it to come across offensive in any way to other healthcare marketers, because there's a lot of tremendous healthcare marketers out there. I just believe that healthcare marketing in general, they've lost sight of what it matters. All health marketing is really inward focused. It's about, hey, look how great we are. Look how great our services are. Look how great our hospitals are. Look how we're open all the time. But we've gotten away from the fact that what we do is about the patient. So when I say I don't want to be a healthcare marketer, I really want to be a consumer marketer who's marketing to patients. And I really, when I came here, I wanted to bring that notion of consumer marketing and really lifestyle marketing to a healthcare brand, if that makes sense.
It does, and it does, and I'm still going to give you honorary or bestow the term renegade on you, because that is, in fact, thinking about bringing category thinking or what might be normal in a consumer area and bringing it to another category is the essence of renegade thinking. It's sort of finding some interesting and what is essentially a novel approach within a lot of constraints, and I think that's the interesting part is, there are constraints in healthcare. So I couldn't help but notice your title also has experience officer in it. And I want to talk about that because, how did that happen? Was that something you sought or was it bestowed upon you?
Well, it's funny. It's a careful what you wish for thing. So, we just spent the last 18 months in repositioning our brand and spent 18 months doing research, talking to patients, talking to consumers, talking to providers, talking to staff. And where we landed is that we want to be a very patient-centric brand centered on innovation. And what I quickly realized that in order to succeed with this notion of being patient-centric, we had to sell an experience. So I really pushed hard to hire someone to head up customer experience. And in that pushing, I guess leadership felt that my passion for experience made me the natural candidate to take on the experience role. And I'm actually glad that's how it worked out, because I think the patient experience and how the brand comes to life are united. And if those aren't linked, I think we have a disconnect. And ultimately, when I talk about patient experience, though, I don't talk about the individual patient as an I, but I talk about the patient as a we. When we think about the patient or the consumer, we're talking about not only the patient, but the mother, the husband, the wife, the son, the daughter, the grandmother. Everybody involved in the patient care is that collective I that I think is important for us to really talk to and manage to. But ultimately, the patient experience doesn't start for what we do with the patient. It starts with what we do for the employee. If we don't have an engaged employee, if we don't have an employee that feels that they're empowered or feels that their personal experience is good, that will never translate into a great patient experience. So again, it's something that I pushed for someone else to do, but I'm glad that the organization felt that I had the passion and the drive and the desire to push it forward.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
There are several things that you said that I just want to recap for listeners, because you said them quickly and they might have missed what was really important there. One, you mentioned that you started with research and talked to customers. Two, you mentioned that from a brand standpoint, you really have to get employees engaged before you can actually go out and talk about this, the brand, because the employees are the ones who make it real. Certainly that is the case in healthcare. But how does a marketer, by training, like yourself, actually have the chops, if you will, to sort of change the way a doctor or a nurse or an orderly interacts with a customer? Isn't that what we're talking about when we talk about customer experience?
Absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing is, if you think about healthcare marketing in the past, is I like to consider ourselves that we were order takers, right? So the physician, the hospital would basically say, I need this. And marketers run off and just do this. The way we've positioned marketing in this organization is we're a strategic alliance to the organization. I have a seat at the table with the senior executive group. I have influence over the board and the decisions that they help make. So I have the ability, as my role, not as a marketer, but as a strategic pillar of the organization, to influence and help guide how we go about. So I have daily conversations with clinical chairs and physicians and nursing staff, and really helping them understand through research, what it is that patients want. And what I love to say is, I hate I think, but I love I know. So let's not focus on what we think individually, but focus on what we know from research and really implement the research and push it forward. And physicians are data-driven, and they really want to know facts and figures and things of that nature. And if we can provide them facts and figures and data, it really helps move the pendulum from a physician-driven environment to a patient-driven environment.
So that's interesting, because I wanted to ask you about the metrics, because the way you measure marketing is different than the way necessarily, typically, is the way that you would measure, say, a customer experience, right? And so, I mean, obviously, if I go into the hospital and I have open heart surgery, I'm really, did I live or die? but there's the other, just sort of the overall experience. Those metrics are very different than the metrics that you would do for the marketing, which might be awareness and lead gen and, beds filled and those kinds of things. So how did you sort of come to a set of metrics that mattered in the experience land, and how do you align those with the metrics that matter in the marketing land?
Yeah, I mean, from a marketing perspective, as you said, we look at the typical brand metrics like brand awareness and preference and likelihood to recommend, and we track leads, we track calls, web traffic, etc. What's interesting though is I'm in a business that's very different than selling candy or water or technology. Nobody wants what I have, right? Nobody's sitting there going, "Boy, I can't wait to have my, liver removed or my heart surgery." I mean, that is not what somebody wants, right? So a lot of the things we're pushing towards is changing the conversation from marketing to you when you're broken, right? So it's this notion of, hey, you have a heart attack, come see me, or you have a broken bone, come see me. They're really changing the conversation to marketing more about a lifestyle thing. So I want to provide you content and resources and talk to you in a way that prevents you from being broken, more of selling you a service after you're broken. So that's this notion of lifestyle brand. From the metrics of, experience, hospitals, CMS requires us to measure and provide results around different hospital metrics that are really tied to outcomes. What we're currently in the process of doing right now is really changing the way we view experience from an outcomes perspective to more of what I like to call the sights, the smells, the sounds. From the minute that a patient gets a diagnosis to the end of care, what's the spectrum of interaction that we have with them? Whether it's evaluating what their experience is with valet parking, the cafeteria, whether they can get access to Wi-Fi while they have a loved one who's, in a procedure. So we're looking at all those things, but more importantly, we're looking at this through the eye of the consumer. So what we're currently in the process of doing now is doing stakeholder interviews to really getting a sense of what the customer experience looks like from the provider perspective, from the employee perspective, and then we're talking to consumers and saying, what's important to you? Because I found when I was in banking a while back, a survey was done that asked customers, what are your top 10 priorities? And then it asked CEOs, what are your top 10 banking priorities? And interestingly enough, only one of the 10 overlapped. So what we're hoping to get out of this research is understanding what the gaps are between what we believe the experience should be, what patients believe the experience should be, and then bridge that gap. So the metrics won't be your typical, outcomes-based metrics, but we're really looking at transitioning ultimately to kind of a net promoter score type thing, is really getting the, who are those that are working for us and working against us, and measure patient satisfaction, customer satisfaction based on all aspects of care, not just, hey, did you make me better?
So where do you think you are in terms of, this, well, I'm going to call this is really organizational change, right? I mean, you're essentially changing the product in order to have something better to market. If you, to be sort of pretty basic about it, how far along are you on this journey?
We are really just starting the process now. So we literally just this week finished all our stakeholder interviews, again, talking to physicians, talking to nurses, talking to just employees in general who interact with patients. And then we are finalizing our patient interviews this month. So we are hoping to have all that data so we can create, understand the gaps, right? We're working with IBM Watson Experience after this to really say, okay, now that we know what the patient wants and where the gaps are, how do we build that bridge, and how do we create what we're going to call the UCHealth experience? And again, it's going to be less focused on outcomes, because that's a given. At the end of the day, it's just like when you go on a flight, right? When you board a plane, your expectation is you're going to go from New York to Denver and you're going to land safely. But it's all the other things that seem to matter these days. Is there Wi-Fi? Do I get a meal on the plane? How much leg room do I have? Do I need to check my baggage, right? So what we're noticing in the healthcare space, outcomes are given. I walk into a hospital feeling sick. My expectation is I walk out feeling better. But everything else, how easy was it to make an appointment? How easy was it to park my car? What was the food in the cafeteria? What kind of music is playing in the hallway? Was my nurse nice to me? Was my bill easy to read? Those are the things that we're focused on. Clearly, the outcomes and the quality of care is the utmost important thing. We're never going to lose sight of that. It's the softer side of healthcare that I think we've lost sight of, and is what we're looking as an organization of how do you build that softer side.
Which I think is a great place for us to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the marketing work that Manny and the team have done at UC Health. I actually had a pleasure of watching a couple of the commercials, and I was weeping in the office. So we'll come back and we'll talk about those. So stay tuned.
Renegade Thinkers Unite is brought to you by Social Media Explorer, the website that explores the world of social media from the inside out. Great advice from today's leading social media columnists and experts at socialmediaexplorer.com. That's socialmediaexplorer.com.
All right, we're back, and my guest is Manny Rodriguez, who is the Chief Marketing and Experience Officer at UC Health. And Manny, I saw it on your bio, so I feel like I can ask you this question. And I'm just, we've been talking about the softer side of healthcare, and as a leukemia survivor, I'm wondering if having had this very personal experience with healthcare is part of your motivation to help bring the softer side to your marketing.
That's a great question, and it's being a survivor of ultimately a disease that takes many lives. It's a motivator for everything I do, and I was working in Boston for one of the largest banks in the world, and when this opportunity presented itself, at the point in my career where what's my legacy and where do I give back? And I found this challenge and this opportunity to help build this amazing brand and healthcare system as my ability to give back and my ability to create a legacy. And the experience piece is just a component to that. And, when I talk about my care, I've been a patient at MD Anderson Memorial Sloan Kettering. I've been a patient here, Dana-Farber. And each one of those, the quality of care is one of the best in the world, but the experience was always very, very different. And I remember, a physician that whether they wrote a little note on their journal or whatever it was, my folder, every time I saw this physician, they said to me, "Hey, how was your trip since the last time I saw you?" Or "How's your son doing?" Or "How's your dog doing?" Whatever it is. And I felt like they really cared about me, versus I had one physician who I was his patient for 6 years, and every time he saw me, he introduced himself to me. So that made me feel like, you don't even know who I am, right? And those little things make a huge difference in the patient experience.
So let's talk a little bit about this advertising that made me cry, and the thinking behind your life, your story, in a quick sort of synopsis, because it's beautiful work, and I'll link to it in my podcast notes. But talk about the process that got you to this marketing campaign that is so lovely.
I appreciate that, and the goal here was to create emotion, right? And when we landed on the brand of, this notion of we want to be a patient-centric brand, one of the very first things we decided is, as a patient-centric brand, we need to stop talking about ourselves and start focusing on the patient. Most healthcare brands look at themselves as the hero, and we believe that our patients are the hero. Our patients go through tremendous sacrifices and agony and pain and suffering to get to better. And we felt that we needed to tell their story. And in telling a story, we realized that you need to create a connection with people. And you can't do that in 30 seconds. And this is why we decided to create films. And that's why the campaigns that you saw that, I appreciate that they moved you, were 90-second spots that really allowed you to make a connection with the patient, connection with the character, and really move you. And the one thing that we took a big risk on is we looked at, having actors portray these people, and we felt that actors just will never, no matter how good they are, be able to draw the raw emotion of a patient. So we took the risk of really casting the patient and telling the story, and the payoff and the benefit has been huge. You really feel, hear, and sense the heartache and the emotion and the feelings in the story.
I saw that, and it was interesting as I finished watching one of the videos, news coverage of the release of the video and the fact that you were running it on the Super Bowl. So you got PR pickup on it, and then what a bold move to run local marketing. I'm sure it was, but within the Super Bowl, that must have really helped spread the word for the brand.
Yeah, I mean, so we actually ran it during the Oscars. So, and the idea there was, because we're creating short films and we're creating stories, we felt, what better place to launch our short films and stories than in a place that honors film and stories, right? So, it was a really opportune time for us to launch the brand and really have our campaign launch in and around the same time as the Oscars, and it's paid off really, really well for us. One of the people in our campaign, Peyton, who's the young lady who suffered from ovarian cancer, she was the youngest person in the United States to be diagnosed with ovarian cancer stage 4. We now love to say she's the youngest person in the United States to be cured of ovarian cancer stage 4. And since this campaign, her modeling career has exploded. In fact, recently, a famous model and actress from London has reached out to her. She's being cast as a teenager with ovarian cancer. They want Peyton to help tell the story for the movie. So, you know, our storytelling has helped this young lady who's remarkable kind of be inspired and have confidence to take her career to another level. And that's just an outcome of this that we never thought would happen.
It's really it's really cool, and it's funny that we're talking about video, which is something we might have been talking about 20 years ago. But there are several components that I think are interesting and new. I really appreciate the fact that you went with real people. The notion that at the end of the day, this was about the patient and not the hospital, and that really comes through. I'm curious as one of the challenges with creating long form content is it's expensive to run, but what a lot of people forget when they hear brands talk about creating content and creating story is that you have to get people to see it. It's not enough to create it, right? They don't just find it. Talk a little bit about how you've made sure that people have begun to discover these stories.
Yeah, so we really believe in 360-degree marketing. So we're in TV, we're in print, we're in radio, we're in out of home. We're very actively involved in social and digital. We're out in the community with these stories, partnering with our internal PR folks, and with Ogilvy, we're really looking to push these stories. And the patients themselves have been amazing advocates to tell these stories for us. And we've gotten, I think just Peyton alone, we've gotten like 57 television news stories all across the country, even in London and Japan, of people wanting to tell their story. And the beauty is, because of their relationship with us and because of their gratitude to what we were able to do for them, they never tell their story without us being in the mix. And that's been a great partnership with the patients. The other thing is, clearly you can't air 90-second TV spots. The budgets just won't allow it. So we have created 30-second spots, and you have no idea how hard it is to try and take a beautiful 90-second story with tremendous emotion and impact and try and get that same emotion and impact in the 30. But these television spots were the brainchild of my internal agency, and they've done a great job of taking 90s and editing them down to really compelling and emotional 30s. So we're very fortunate.
And that's a great, because my next question was, did you have outside help with this? I mean, these are professionally produced, and whoever, certainly shot them and edited them understood storytelling at a very sophisticated level.
Yeah, so the stories were developed internally. They were written internally. And the reason that these stories are so compelling is because we have these emotional connections and relationships with the patients, so we're allowed to tell the story. Like if I said to you, Drew, tell me about your son, you'd be able to tell me a very compelling, passionate story. But if I told you, tell me about my son, you'd only be able to tell me about the details I've shared with you. So we wrote the stories internally, but we worked with our agency at the time, Gray San Francisco, to help produce, help get a director, really help bring them to life. And the partnership between the internal agency and Gray San Francisco was truly a phenomenal partnership.
That's great. Yeah, and that makes sense. David Beebe was on the podcast, and he talked about building a studio inside of Marriott. But he's an ex-Hollywood film guy, and he built a huge studio that was able to do this all in-house. I think for most companies, if you want to tell this, and again, I'm going to put the videos in the show notes, but if you really want to produce quality at this level, you're going to need professional help, and you need a director and an editor and a great cameraman, even if you have an epic story. And that is just sort of my next point on this thing is the term storytelling is thrown around so much in our industry. We heard it a lot on the stage. And at least from my perspective, it's overused and underdelivered in that people don't really understand what we're talking about when it comes to brand. And what you provided in these things is the hero's journey. I mean, the princess she was a damsel in distress. You guys have an interesting role in this story, but you're not the center of the story, the individual, the hero or heroine, if you will, in the case of the young lady with ovarian cancer, and that understanding of storytelling. Now, I'm curious, there is some common story that is being told overall. And what's funny is, and your tagline is "Your life, your story." I mean, you just said stories are everything. I mean, our story is storytelling. I mean, when you boil it down, right? I mean, it's interesting. You sort of grabbed onto this thing in a big way. Tell me, how hard was it to sell this idea internally?
It wasn't hard at all. I mean, I think one of the really fortunate benefits that I have is I have a CEO that believes in what we're doing. My CEO, when she recruited me, she didn't want somebody from the healthcare space. She really wanted, as you say, that renegade. She wanted somebody who can come in here and think differently. And since then, I mean, I've hired so many people out of industry. Actually, I've never hired anybody in industry. I've hired people from that wrote for Disney. I've hired my head of my creative agency is from an advertising agency. I actually we're very big in partnership marketing. So I hired somebody from the Seattle Seahawks, and I hired somebody from CenturyLink, and I've hired all these people outside of industry because we think differently, and the work we've been doing has given our leadership such confidence that, we have a lot of rope, and we haven't hung ourselves yet. We continue to extend the lag that we have on the rope, and we're giving a lot of leeway, and there's a lot of confidence in the board and leadership in what we do. And, that's a really great place to be when, as a marketer, you're allowed to go, right? And you don't feel like, wow, do I need to sell this? We really present concepts and go and feel very confident that we're not going to get challenged, and we've been very fortunate.
Okay. So, unfortunately, we're going to have to bring the podcast to an end relatively quickly because my producer, Kevin Craig, who I always like to give a shout out to, says, the average commute is about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and you got to get it done in between there. So if you could you have an audience of marketers who are listening, and let's say we talk about the storytelling journey that you've been on. What are, say, 3 key takeaways, 3 lessons learned that anybody who's about to do what you have done in terms of transforming the message, literally transform the organization, and also have the message to go with it? What are the 3 key lessons?
Wow, that's a great question. And I think, the first one is frequent communications. You can't over communicate. Anytime you go down this journey, you're going to move somebody's cheese, and you're going to have a lot of naysayers and resistance, and communicate and over communicate. The second part of this is having tough skin. As you know, no matter how great something is, People are not going to like it. People are going to wish you continue to do things the own way. People are going to be critical. You got to have tough skin. You can't take things personally. The third thing is you got to be very patient. Things take time. Whenever you're reinventing the wheel or trying to do something different or trying to push the envelope, you got to be patient. And, those are three you asked for. I'll give a fourth one. And the fourth one is really perseverance. Is you got to believe in yourself. You got to believe in the idea. You got to fight for the idea and don't give up, right? Just because there are hiccups along the way, persevere, keep fighting, keep pushing forward.
It's a wonderful summary, and it sort of fits into. I have this CATS acronym of courage, artful, thoughtful, and scientific as what are sort of the key things that separate an average CMO from a great one. And I can easily align what you said with that. The tough skin and the perseverance are sort of two attributes of courage. I often talk about communication as a critical phase, and this is the artfulness that a CMO needs because they simply can't do their job alone. They have to get others to come along board. I love the patience notion. In this day, everybody wants to get something done, but when we're talking about organizational change, as you are not going to get every doctor and every nurse and every orderly and every person working at registration and to change behavior overnight. But what I think is so interesting and inspiring is, and I would be surprised if when you showed those ads to employees, I cannot believe that they didn't go, "Oh my God, that's amazing. I'm so proud to work at this company, at this hospital, at this organization." And so as we wrap up here, Manny, I just want again, thank you for being on the show. Congratulate you for some incredibly emotional work, and just answer that last question about did the employees sort of applaud when they saw this?
Well, they did, and what's funny is not only did they applaud, we heard a lot of finally leadership gets it, right? So, our employees, this is what they do. They do this for the patient, right? They are in a business that you work long hours, you don't get paid very well, you don't sleep well, and they do it for the patient. And finally, here we are, we're not talking about anybody else but the patient, and they were really emotionally connected to the idea of finally focusing on the patient.
All right. Well, finally, we are coming to an end of this podcast. Thank you all for listening. Manny, thanks again for being on the show.
That's true. Thank you. Appreciate it.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.